This is Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. We're taking a look at this long-awaited expansion for the experience. Be sure to like the video, subscribing is great as well. So Cyberpunk came out a few years ago, as you might be aware. It got patched up, it got fixed, the DLC expansion, which is this, got delayed. And here we are a few years afterwards, following the big 2.0 update overall. Here we are with the expansion, and it is absolutely awesome and spectacular, and well worth the wait for the setup that we have going on here. So for context, we are on Xbox Series X, but we're more focused on what this expansion provides as opposed to technical type stuff, but we will talk about that a little bit as well later on, just trying to provide some details. And the footage here is from the first hour and a half or so, with a couple random little mission bits thrown in too, so there shouldn't be anything too spoilerish for what CD Projekt represents. Phantom Liberty! So yeah, let's talk and dive into this expansion. So this takes place kind of, I guess you would say, a bit more late game in terms of the content of where it kind of settles from a narrative perspective. It's really quite interesting. So the stage and the stakes here are that the president of the new United States of America, NASA, whatever you want to call it, basically has been taken down in this place called Dogtown. So if you're familiar with the Night City map, which is, you know, the place Cyberpunk 2077 takes place, there's this area called Pacifica, and kind of right beside that is the newly remodeled and available Dogtown. It really does have a scope and feel of its own, and if you're working through just the story content, you really get a sense that this space is quite large. They use the area effectively. The more you kind of play around with it, the more you kind of go, okay, it's a bit of a tighter spot in terms of like the main, like how far it goes out, but as you're playing the story, it feels like every single area of this place is completely fresh and unique. They really nail that sense of like scale and feeling where everything is kind of fresh and different, and it's really quite an exciting place to play in and a new space to explore, because you're probably, if you've played a lot of Cyberpunk and you're excited for this, you're familiar with Night City, you're familiar with the places, the areas. It's a big city, it takes a long time to get familiar with it, but I have at this point. So it was nice and refreshing to actually have a new space that I could play or play within. Now, if you are kind of wondering, is like, does it just all take place here? It's like, yeah, pretty much. There's like a little bit of bleed into Night City as things progress a bit more, but the vast majority of this experience is an entirely new space. It's awesome. It really is. Like, it's a cool area. It's a crime-ridden area. It's a place where there is this dude running it with an iron fist. It's really quite an intriguing space. Think of it as kind of being like a bit of a Vegas type area, but like the money and everything is just kind of messed up, and it's really quite lavish at times, but also just some of the worst run areas that you've come across if you've played the regular experience of, you know, going through Cyberpunk and Night City. It has such highs for luxury and such extreme lows, but this expansion has everything. There's dancing, there's drinking, there's gambling, there's exciting narratives, there's spy thriller missions, because you're working to save the president. Although that aspect of the story kind of disappears a little bit. I guess if you do maybe some more of the side missions, it kind of like fills it out a bit, but you know, you start like really intimately, kind of your goal is like, hey, there's this person, Songbird, rings you up, you've got a mission, you need to get in there, and you have to save the president and stuff. And then from there, you kind of share like a good chunk of time kind of getting to know the president, and then from, you know, you get a bit of a handoff where our big character Reed, Idris Elba, who gives just an excellent performance in this expansion, like a really great performance. And you know, that's something we don't always comment on in reviews and gameplay or talk about, but yeah, that's really good. It's like, you know, movie like kind of performance. I was like, wow, he's really into this. maybe even more so. I don't know. Keanu actually goes pretty hard as well. But yeah, you get like a bit more of a replacement here, like Keanu there with Silverhand. He steps back a bit for at least the opening of the game. It makes sense as you progress. Like at first I was kind of like, oh, I don't like that he's not in this as much because I really do enjoy his character. But then as things go on, you're kind of like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, no, I get this. Because you've got to develop Reed as a character who's a long-term agent and everything like that. He's in this mix, and his story gets revealed, and Songbird's story gets revealed, and the president's story gets revealed, and so does yours. And it's this long, winding, twisting tale of alliances and what's going on, what's the mystery here, why did the president get taken down into this area of Dogtown, what's happening, who's running the show. It's really neat. It actually really is, from like a story perspective. I was kind of like, oh, okay, and then there's, you can kind of figure some things out, and then there's always some sort of extra little surprise and whatnot that makes you go, oh, okay, interesting. And it is a lengthy story. Like, it feels very much like its entirely own game, and it's beautiful. Like, it's very visually, like, just stunning, like the places you go, and it very effectively uses, as I've mentioned, the space of Dogtown to just sort of create like these always very cinematic like moments. Like, you'll just be talking to somebody, but there's this huge, amazing cyberpunk backdrop that just looks absolutely phenomenal, that's just there in the background while you're having these conversations. And I know you get that, oh, here's our first show of little bit of Idris. You don't see a whole lot of them in my review here, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a tease. Believe it or not, you do meet him pretty early on, and a lot of the story kind of follows around his character. You're kind of working together, basically, is a lot of it. And it's very interesting to see the sort of, because he's a bit secret agent-like, but not really, like, maybe a little bit like Bond, I don't know. It's got like a really neat mix of missions, some more stealth-based, some more like action-driven. But as I was talking about, like, it's got like these crazy cinematic scenes and these huge moments, and this great sense of like scale to it. And as I was also saying, it's a large, long, lengthy experience with also a lot of side activities and whatnot that you can get into if you are, kind of into that sort of thing. Like, I can't wait to actually really sink my teeth into a lot of the kind of secondary content in this one. I was trying to do a bit of missions, trying to get through all this stuff. But, you got your usual things, the fixer missions, the gigs, the extra, activities, and a new space that you can jump in and play, which is great. So those round out the experience even further from just doing the main story. But the main story itself is long and lengthy. And I was actually really impressed because there was a certain point where I'm like, oh, this feels like abrupt. And then I'm like, oh, okay, so it's kind of going into this big end game sort of thing. And your choices will greatly impact how this tale ends, and maybe even how some sort of greater tale kind of comes to some sort of conclusion as well. And it is, depending on what you end up with, it could be very emotional, very deep, maybe even a bit sombering of a thing, a bit profound. Like, I'm actually still just even processing what happened. I'm going to have to do some more differing runs to see some differing ways that this sort of all wraps up, but it's quite a journey. I would say it's actually an essential part of your Cyberpunk experience. Like, if you've played the main game, you really do need to experience this to get the full sense of the story. Like, you can finish the main game of Cyberpunk, and sure, you won't, like, you'll have your endings. If you've played that, you'll have your endings. But I really do personally feel like this is such an important addition and expansion upon the concepts of what happened in that core game, leaving me, I believe at this point, quite satisfied. Also just thinking about things as well, just kind of wondering. And it would be just amazing if they could pump out expansions like this more often. If we could get like one like this every year, every couple years. And I know that's probably not possible. That would be just amazing. Because, like, the story setup is just so good here. Like, the characters, the world they have, the concepts of, just the cyberpunk environment is just so well handled and so interesting. And I feel like there's so many things you could do and so many tales you could have. I'm very, very excited to see this universe kind of get expanded upon. I hope sooner than later, but it takes time to get these sort of experiences. But yeah, I really, really did love this. It felt like a sort of narrative that I was just missing. Like, I really enjoyed the main game of Cyberpunk, issues and stuff aside. The storytelling and the character development and, the world and all that is, to me, really, really great. I genuinely love it. I thought it was a great story game, especially from like a shooter RPG sort of perspective. They really, really quite nail it. I've mentioned in my other reviews, if you've seen those, the Cyberpunk game of my dreams, it really is. And while this one kind of moves away from that idea of like a crazy, like it is a cyberpunk world, but it's not quite like the main area, right? Like this is a gritty, dark place where it's sort of like the casino strip gone completely off the rails in terms of like the most extreme levels of poverty versus luxury. It's just fascinating to actually take a look at. Now this is a good point because I think you can kind of see it. I will mention that the performance in this area isn't the greatest for performance mode. Like it actually has some like pretty deep performance hiccups whenever you're going through the main strip. If you're just doing story type content, you go to offshoot areas, you're doing main mission stuff, not a problem. That's all smooth. Like anything that's story wise or story related, perfectly fluid and stuff. But if you're just running around in this main strip area, there's definitely some performance issues that are present. Like I don't know if it's just too demanding and too crazy. I can kind of see why. Like especially not only for this element of it where it's having some performance troubles in the main area, it's also just like the sense of scale and like the density of scenes and areas and stuff. I can definitely see why last gen consoles were left behind for this expansion. I think they kind of just easily early on were like, yeah, no, it's just not gonna fully cut it in this regard. But it's good. Like this is really well done. It's got all of the cyberpunk that you might love, and it's just an expansion upon that. But it's large and it's fulfilling, and it offers something really exciting that you can kind of sink your teeth into. I loved this return to Cyberpunk. I felt right at home. I loved the funny character moments, the crazy action scenes. You kind of got to do what is essentially a bunch of like really cool Hollywood-like movie scenes. I know that sounds strange, but you are kind of working as you save the president, right? Like that opens the stage for you to basically be doing all of these crazy things. Like I said, there's like a big secret gala event, there's infiltration missions, there's things of intrigue, and I'm trying not to spoil anything. Like I'm trying to process what just happened too, because this is pretty fresh. I didn't get like a ton of time to think about the experience. I'm trying to like really freshly dive into this, but it's got action and it's got like hidden backdrop things where a character will be like, oh, that guy didn't tell you everything, or she was hiding stuff, and you go, what? And it's kind of like, to a degree, a lot of, for me, like quite a bit of it was predictable, but they do have their fun bits, like I mentioned, where I'm kind of like, oh, okay, interesting, yeah, let's see where this goes. And you just get to visit a really colorful, interesting locale. And I like the new faction as well, the kind of this, I guess you would call them a faction. Yeah, your main kind of villain person, again, the individual running Dogtown with the Iron Fist there. You get a few interactions with that character that I thought were really quite intriguing, because you get some differing perspectives on what this person's about, and they build a nice sense of like intrigue and mystique as you're sort of like, okay, how did this guy build this empire? What happened to make this, kind of go on? And it's very, very interesting. And that's where I'm kind of like, some story elements feel abrupt, but overall, by the time you're finished, you're like, okay, this was well worth this time. I'm like, this is really, really good. There are some little spots in the middle, I guess maybe a little, we're like 70 to 80% of the way through, where I'm like, I wish I could have had like an extra hour or so to just kind of let some of this stuff breathe. But then you do have the extra missions, the extra things you can dive into, and the extra stuff you can do. So that stuff kind of does expand it a little bit more, which is nice. But yeah, it's really quite a good package. And I should also mention that while we are showing off some driving sequences, a lot of this game is more pedestrian, where you will find yourself kind of walking through areas. Like there's this nice diner area with a tree that's quite beautiful, and then you know, you got the main strip we've been walking through. Like you can get a vehicle, but I would recommend more like kind of driving a bike through if you're doing that, or just kind of going about on foot, because it is a tighter space. It's more like there's a lot of density as opposed to necessarily like large winding streets and whatnot. It's a different approach from the main area of Night City, and it works. It really does work. And they try to like offer you a little bit more variety. I was a little bit worried early on. They kept like really pushing this sort of turn on the power thing. I think mechanic happened like 3 or 4 times, and I was like, is this all this DLC is going to be? Is a lot of like turning on the power, and then you never have to do so again after that one point. I was like, oh, okay. So it was just like a opening kind of thing or something. And the game also feels fresh from the perspective of like the 2.0 update. It's weird because I'm like, obviously, like this review is focused on the expansion. And I do have one that talks, like a review video that talks about the 2.0 update and what that provides. But it's interesting because it's kind of like, it feels like a totally new game. Like if you've been away from Cyberpunk for a while, aside from just like the fixes, the 2.0 update here really does revamp like your skills and the way you level, and that actually really changed how I played the story stuff too. It was really quite interesting because it was sort of like, as I was mentioning, the way you level and the way you improve your skills and the relic skills and everything like that, that feeds into sort of what you're doing in very interesting ways. So I quite liked that aspect of it. And just something I wanted to highlight was sort of like, it does feel like a very much refreshed game. It feels familiar, but it feels as though a lot of the stuff that I was used to has kind of been changed and tweaked, and you get to become a little bit more powerful almost by the end of it, which I thought was nice, because I did feel a little bit of a dot down from the 2.0 update, and then once I was getting these new abilities, I was like, okay, now I'm really kind of cooking, moving around, killing stuff. I loved it. Just again, in general, the expansion I absolutely loved. Like this is well worth it. This is a great time. You know, there's some story stuff where I'm like, oh, this could have been expanded upon and blah blah blah, but I mean, it's lengthy. There's a lot to it. I love the different like scenes and stuff, from being a little bit more secretive to doing a party scene to doing some sort of infiltration with like sniper scope type thing. You get to really feel and have these cool moments within the world of Cyberpunk, like kind of fresh ideas that they didn't, at least from what I recollect, they didn't really do with the main story. They have fun with it and stuff. And there's lots of great callbacks and expansions upon what happened prior. I think most people that like Cyberpunk are going to be blown away by this. I think if you're coming in fresh and you're doing the main game plus this, you're going to be just blown away by the amount of content that's present here. Like this is very, very good. I really had such a pleasure rushing through it to a degree, right? Because I needed to get everything ready and done. But like this is well worth your experience. You are going to have an absolutely great time playing this story. And it does feel entirely like it has its own narrative arc while still lending itself fully into expanding upon the main narrative of the game. So if you kind of get them together, I think you're going to have an even crazier time. Like if you're fresh playing Cyberpunk, you're going to be like, wow, this is a really, really full story. If you're coming back and you're like, it does feel more expansion-like because it adds to what's already there. But it works. It really does. Like I think they nailed this one from like a visual standpoint. It looks very like just gorgeous. Like a lot of the scenes are just so stunning, and the character models, like Elba's character model, a lot of the other characters too, look absolutely fantastic. And then the performances, as I mentioned earlier, are all really, really great here. I was really, really, again, refreshed with female V's here. Voice delivery, absolutely fantastic. Elba was just great. Keanu hit the mark, and then the supporting characters all really help sell the world too. And that's, Cyberpunk is it's trying to sell you this experience and this, unique area that you're visiting. And I think Phantom Liberty just absolutely nails it, hits the mark well. You'll have a grand time. You'll have a lot of gameplay to enjoy. It feels like its whole own game. This is probably one of the best DLCs I've played. It's really genuinely impressive.